Trust in politicians is at an all-time low.
Shut up a minute!
British Social Attitudes reported that trust and confidence in Britain's system of government is at a record low. A record high of 45% say they almost never trust governments of any party to place the needs of the nation above the interests of their own political party. As many as 58%, also a record high, say they almost never trust politicians of any party in Britain to tell the truth when they're in their tight corner. And 79% say the system of governing Britain could be improved quite a lot or a great deal. What a massive shambles. Although it feels it would almost be naive to think differently. Over the past 15 years, a string of high-profile controversies have deepened public scepticism, and we're going to cover 3 political scandals in this video.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We spoke with former MP Tom Brake, who served the Liberal Democrats for 20 years without scandal, and now leads Unlock Democracy, an organisation pushing for fairer, more transparent governance. Tom explains concerns around second jobs, the PPE scandal, and the expenses scandal.
Okay, I'm ready.
He says by implementing certain regulations we can prevent these scandals from happening again and hold MPs to account. The first issue we spoke about was second jobs, but before we get into that, it's important to mention that MPs technically don't have a job description, which means legally they don't need to do anything at all to get paid. A famous example was in 2023 when Nadine Dorries used Twitter to state she'd resigned as an MP with immediate effect. However, she didn't resign officially. Basically, she stopped doing nearly all the work expected of an MP, but was still taking a salary, and continued to do so for 3 months. Tom tried to take this to the Parliamentary Commissioner.
He said, well, I can't really do anything because members of Parliament don't have a job description, and I can't point to that and say that she's not doing her job. To draw your salary, the only thing you have to do is to turn up in Parliament and swear the oath of allegiance. Having signed that, a member of Parliament could jump on a plane to the Bahamas and lie in the sun for 4 or 5 years until the next general election is called. The key things that a member of Parliament should do, should be in their job description, is representing their constituents and working in Parliament, scrutinising legislation.
Sounds fair enough. If any normal person refused to work because they're annoyed, then they'd be sacked. Anyway, on to other jobs MPs currently have. It was recently reported many MPs are getting paid a lot of money outside of Parliament. The highest earner, bringing in £570,000 on top of the £91,000 MP salary, is Nigel Farage.
Do I have a successful company that operates and earns income from a variety of things? Yeah.
However, his business is using his political connections to talk about politics on TV and working for companies like Nomad Capitalist, who, ironically, help people get second passports or residencies away from the UK to reduce or eliminate UK tax obligations.
The great thing about being a Member of Parliament is that you can have as many other jobs as you want. If you want to accumulate a number of directorships or non-executive positions, if you want to take up any number of media engagements such as I'm a celebrity, get me out of here, then you can do that.
Parliament is still sitting, we're not in recess.
Yeah. No, but Rishi's great, he'll be fine.
And there are no restrictions on how much money you can earn by doing that. If a Member of Parliament is working on behalf of a foreign government, and that happens, where does that MP's loyalty lie when it comes to discussions that relate to our relationship with that foreign country, for instance? Well, I'm not going to name names because that might be potentially damaging.
Very dignified, Tom. Anyway, here's a list of MPs who took money from foreign governments with human rights concerns, as reported by the Byline Times. Theresa May was the highest paid. She took nearly £250,000 for speaking engagements. Then Mark Menzies took nearly £36,000 in 2017. A month after being paid, he wrote banning arms sales to Saudi Arabia would harm Britain and the Middle East, including Yemen, who the bombs were being dropped on, but okay. Another ex-Tory MP, Daniel Kaczynski, was reported to be begging for Saudi consultancy work to pay for school fees. However, MPs' jobs are obviously insecure, as there's always the chance they'll only survive one term. Here's what Tom feels is reasonable when it comes to second jobs.
As an organisation, Unlock Democracy, we do believe there are circumstances in which an MP can earn money from another role, and the example of a GP is a good one, and it's not unreasonable for a Member of Parliament to spend perhaps 20 hours a week doing something else. And we think it's reasonable in those circumstances to allow a Member of Parliament to earn perhaps say, half of their income as a Member of Parliament, but we would still want the Parliamentary Commissioner, so the person who oversees Members of Parliament, to be able to look at whether he thought that that level of outside activity was something that wasn't detrimental to the interests of that MP's constituents.
So to conclude, Tom thinks MPs earning 50% of their salary doing something else is reasonable, and I think that sounds fair. The Labour Party recently started a committee to discuss second jobs. However, using the platform of one of his other jobs, Nigel Farage stated he feels he's been picked on and bullied. A leader of a political party having his own show on national TV to complain about things happening in Parliament does feel a little bit like propaganda, but hey ho. Anyway, on to the next part of the video and the PP scandal. We asked Tom what happened and why it was wrong.
What the government did is they set up the VIP fast lane. People who had a politician in government that they knew from a business perspective, or because in one case that politician went to the pub that the person was running, had their bids or their tenders fast-tracked without competition. Some of the consequences of that are the very large amount of PPE that was unusable, and the fact that in some cases the cost of those contracts was 4 times what it would have been otherwise.
So approximately 10 billion of the 13.5 billion spent on PPE was written off. PPE that filled entire warehouses will need to be removed and burned. Also, the High Court found that the use of the VIP lane was unlawful. The most senior people involved in the scandal are no longer MPs, but there's still ongoing legal cases and an internal government COVID inquiry. We asked Tom what the government are looking for.
Try to identify whether there was active fraud or whether there was just simply a willingness to award contracts to a company which frankly was never going to be equipped to deliver that product. And there is the possibility still that the law has more to say on whether they fulfilled their PPE contracts to the letter of the law, or whether they should be required to reimburse the taxpayer for materials that were unsuitable. There are still cases, Baroness Mohn being one of them, which I think are still going through the courts, being looked at, which I don't particularly want to comment on.
Michelle Mohn is a businesswoman and Conservative peer. PPE MedPro, a company linked to Mohn and her husband, won a contract through the VIP lane worth 200 million quid.
If you work hard, be honest and never ever give up.
Initially, she lied and said she wasn't linked to the company, but later admitted her and her family will make money from the deal. This is her yacht. You might have seen Led by Donkeys give it a paint job. The main problem with the deal was, you guessed it, the PPE was unusable, and it turns out that 65 million of the profit went to Michelle Mohn and her husband. The government initiated legal action against PPE MedPro. The case is still ongoing. The government's COVID inquiry is also still ongoing. Tom and Unlock Democracy want to ensure proper regulations are put in place to stop anything like this happening again.
The COVID inquiry will move on to looking at procurement, so no doubt they will, at the end of their deliberations, come up with some recommendations, and then we need to make sure that they're acted on. So the sooner we put in place clear rules about what happens in the future, and the sooner we make it clear that there will be enforcement activity if those rules are breached, then the better equipped we will be to handle a pandemic in the future.
Sometimes when we hear about regulations that may or may not be enforced, it can make our eyes roll, as it feels MPs are almost never held to account. That's why we've included the next and final section of the video, the expenses scandal. In 2009, The Telegraph got hold of MPs' expenses, and over a few weeks they published how taxpayer money had been misused.
David Chater and of course the other parliamentarians who now face separate trials on unrelated expenses charges know just what it is to be the focus of real public outrage.
MPs claimed for all sorts of outrageous things, but the worst offenders committed fraud, claiming invoices for things that didn't actually exist, which resulted in 5 Labour MPs going to prison. We asked Tom what it was like to be an MP when the expenses scandal story broke.
It was calamitous, I would say, for Parliament. The Daily Telegraph, I'm sure their circulation was boosted very, very heavily by people all over the country who were reading the Daily Telegraph each day to find out whether their own Member of Parliament featured in the Daily Telegraph or not. Now, I'm pleased to say, as far as I was concerned, every day they were also running a half-page spread on MPs who hadn't broken the rules. And I'm pleased to say that the only time I appeared in the Daily Telegraph over the expenses scandal was in that half page of members of Parliament who had not broken the rules.
That's a boy, Tom. People have never fully trusted politicians, as we all have different perspectives on what the most important issues are, so there will always be a level of distrust or even dislike. In 2009, trust in politicians hit an all-time low after the expenses scandal, and in 2024, trust in British politics hit a record low once again. We asked Tom if he noticed that decline in trust firsthand.
The MP's expenses scandal absolutely heightened people's awareness of the role and the activities of members of Parliament. There is no doubt that their constituents would have been left with a rather sort of sour taste in their mouths and will have categorised all politicians, and this is the problem, all politicians as being on the make. And they're not. Some are, a small number are, but overwhelmingly they're not. But it just needs 2 or 3 really bad offenders for everyone else to get tarred with the same brush.
As I mentioned, 5 MPs went to prison, others were forced to repay some of their expenses, and in 2010, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, or IPSA, was created. IPSA's role is to set MPs' pay, oversee their expenses, and ensure everything is properly accounted for and available for public scrutiny. There has been a few notable cases since IPSA was created where MPs have misused expenses, but nothing like the levels of 2009, highlighting that regulation makes a big difference and enables the public to hold MPs to account more easily.
So rather than having the Fees Office, which was very much an internal parliamentary body, it was the responsibility for dealing with MPs' expenses and salaries was handed over to an independent body, IPSA. I think that was a positive development, a break between MPs and their salaries and their expenses and the independent body that is responsible for managing them. And I think that is a far healthier position for Parliament and for members of Parliament to be in than was the case before the MPs' expenses scandal.
Speaking to Tom helped me understand that there are solutions that can be put in place to better regulate politicians, but the groups that advocate for those changes, like Unlock Democracy, aren't well known. The media tends to favour stories from MPs in senior roles, MPs with big mouths or with their own TV shows. In the UK, poverty is deepening, we have a housing crisis where even people on 6 figures can't afford to buy homes, and an education system where 1/5 of schools provide no education about politics, while students from fee-paying schools are primed to become MPs. These things create big problems of their own, but the root cause is all the same, and it starts in Parliament. Campaigning with groups like Unlock Democracy is the best way to get your voices heard and to ensure the regulations covered in this video are implemented.
I don't see any conflicts of interest whatsoever.
MPs who feel 150 grand isn't enough are admitting something about themselves, and that's that they've forgotten who they serve and are therefore in the wrong career. We asked Tom, what's the worst that can happen if we don't properly regulate Parliament?
I mean, I don't want to give the impression that the UK politics is rife with corruption, because it isn't. There are occasionally people who fall out of line. Sometimes they end up in prison, sometimes they end up being expelled from Parliament. What we can do is we can regulate. We need to put those guardrails in, and then that will help this process, which I think is pretty critical in a democracy, of starting to rebuild trust in politicians, because I don't want people to go away from this video thinking that, you know, what we want as an answer is a strong man to run the country. Let's reflect a little bit on the strong men who have run countries in the past. Stalin, Hitler, Pinochet. They don't have a very good track record of delivering services. They don't have a very good track record on human rights. And that's certainly not a route that we should be entertaining in the UK.